We're at the second day of the Advancing School Mental Health Conference today, and I just saw an amazing presentation by four recovery coordinators that are leading the recovery after a school shooting. And so I wanted everyone to meet them and understand how important their role is. My name is Max Schachter. My little boy Alex was murdered in the Parkland school shooting, and I have Lori Alhadeff here as well.
Hi, I'm Lori Alhadeff. I'm Alyssa's mom, and happy to be here and hear more about what you all do.
After the Parkland school shooting, a lot of the public, we talk about the horrible tragedies of a school shooting and how it has, devastated our lives as victims' families of a mass shooting. But what we don't talk a lot about is the recovery and the ripple effects of how it affects the community, the school, the administrators, and the ripple effects. And a lot of times we have terrible suicides from kids that have survivor's guilt. And so I view one of the most important things a school superintendent should do after a school shooting is hire a recovery coordinator. And we have 4 recovery coordinators that are helping their district. So if I could just go around, Nate, can you please introduce yourself, talk about your role and why it's so important to have someone do what you do in the aftermath of a tragedy?
Yeah, sure. I'm Nate Thompson, and I'm the Director of Social Emotional and Behavior Services in Littleton Schools in Colorado. And we had a school shooting in 2013 at Arapahoe High School. And my role was to lead the mental health support and recovery process there. And I was someone who worked in the school system, so I was tasked with that job. And I think everybody who's in this role has a different kind of background or is brought into it in a different way. But what I think we do know through many years of working through these incidents is that you need somebody. It's very, very important to have someone whose primary job is to look after the mental health response and recovery and to advocate for that in the midst of all the other things happening. And so I believe that it's critical and that everybody who goes through one of these has to immediately be thinking about who's going to serve in that role. And I think you'll hear from different folks that can be done in different ways, but you have to have someone doing that for the long term and really thinking through all of the stages from the initial shock and helping your brain recover from such a traumatic event, supporting all of those impacted, thinking about the many, many milestones that you're going to go through in recovery. It's a critical aspect.
Hi, I'm Lisa Wilby-Veet, and I am the MSD Family Liaison from the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting on February 14th, 2018. My role is a little unique because I'm not embedded in with the district. I'm a consultant with the district, and I support the families that were most impacted. So families whose loved ones who were murdered in the building and injured survivors. I've been honored to walk that path for the last 8.5 years. My primary role, because of the number of families that were impacted and some of the complexities and inherent tensions following a tragedy, to have a single point of contact where families had one person to reach out to, and I was able to communicate from the district all of the information. So I was a safe space. Families got to choose how they wanted to receive that information, and they know an email from me or a contact, a phone call or a text. I really let every individual family decide how they wanted to interact. And that has kind of been the path that we've utilized to help support the families that were most impacted. I also worked very closely with administration at MSD to help those supportive services and ensure that every group, as we were sharing information, that we're also ensuring that, those students on campus and faculty and staff, that there was a common message to ensure that every group felt that they had the information that they needed to move forward. In recovery, I don't necessarily say we recover from the death of a child or a spouse, a friend, a loved one, or the concept of safety in our community, but how do we move forward collectively together? But also my priority was always being the voice for families, that how they wanted to participate, allowing that to take place.
And my name is Todd Bartless. I have had the privilege to serve Oxford Community Schools in the role of Executive Director of Student Services and Wellness for the last 3 years. This year I transitioned into a building administrator role and continue to support some of the wellness efforts with the district as they move forward in recovery. I came in after the tragedy, shortly after, and as Nate referenced, my district leaders were fortunate enough to be able to consult with other communities, Nate being one of them, who came in and just emphasized the importance of having someone with a mental health lens at that cabinet level in the district in order to help guide communication, recovery planning, trauma-informed initiatives throughout the district and our community. And so my role really was to support our recovery coordinators as well as our mental health staff across the district, both at the high school where our shooting occurred, as well as throughout the rest of the district where we had siblings, staff members who had children in our schools, and had family members in the building. And so over my time there, we highlighted in our presentation that we just completed here at the conference, we really, my role was to support our staff, both in many of the legal processes, as well as also supporting our district's recovery plan work as we move forward. So we had to make sure that we had systems in place, and we also worked with community partners, including our Resiliency Center and other mental health providers in our community, to meet the needs of those most impacted. One of the most important things to recognize as a mental health leader in a district that's experienced a tragedy is to know that everybody recovers at a different pace. Everyone moves forward at different times, and making certain that you and your leadership team is aware of how do you support people as they progress through that process of recovery, because everyone, you might need to take 2 steps backwards to not leave anybody behind in that process as you go forward. So always maintaining that awareness is very important. So with that, I think one thing we've gathered is, although our communities are very different, there are so many similarities as we come together to support one another that has been so valuable.
I'm Kelsey Zimmer. I have the privilege of serving as the recovery coordinator for Appalachia High School. There's so much I could say to echo what Nate, Lisa, and Todd have just shared, but my role has been unique in that I was hired from outside of the school district, from the community. I stepped into the role in February of this year. Our shooting was on September 4th, 2024, so I stepped into the role about 5.5 months after the tragedy occurred. And I think one of the things I really emphasize is not only allowing someone to step in and take on the role of what does mental health recovery look like, but also to bear the burden, in a sense, for some of our district admin, principal, any leaders within the school. Because if you think about it, all of those individuals had full-time jobs before the tragedy occurred. And so to place extra weight on their shoulders as they are trying to figure out what are their next steps in moving forward, how do they lead through a tragedy that they never expected to face, to expect them to wear the weight of, let's make all of these decisions on your own, let's do all of the communication, let's, walk alongside of our staff and our students and caregivers, everyone in the community, that is an insurmountable task. And so to hire someone to step into that role, and that is their main priority, I think is where you really reap the benefits of having a recovery focused position. And so stepping into the role, I work very, very closely with not only our principal, but our district leaders, our staff, our students, some of our most impacted families, caregivers, kind of how the others have spoken about. I work with community partners and have been out there since the beginning, kind of forming those relationships, determining what services could be beneficial, where do we maybe need to pause and reevaluate at a later time, how do we work with a resiliency center in the community, and what is the balance of this is what's occurring in the school and this is what's occurring in the community, and where does there need to be overlap? Where do we offer supports to our students and staff in the building and also allow those supports within the community? So I think having someone who is able to focus on that day in and day out and really ride the ebbs and flows of what the recovery efforts look like, because it's ever changing. One day you're focused on, one task, and the next day it could be completely different, because healing is not a linear line. You're going up and down, and different things are happening in the community and around you in the building. And so to just be able to work with that and be prepared to take on whatever that day, that week, that month hold. And we're still early on in our recovery in that we haven't started our trial. We haven't gotten to any of that. And so to know that that is a path that I can walk alongside our community through, and that's not weight that all has to fall on our leaders in the school district itself, is truly a privilege of mine. And I'm just grateful to be there and to be able to have the relationships to continue that path forward.
That I wanted to talk about is the reunification plan and that day of the tragedy. A lot of my trauma that I have is based on that day, that horrific day. And there was no communication and there was no mental health person helping us that day. And to have some person, it could have been helpful. And nothing, obviously, it was the most traumatic day of my life, losing my daughter, Alyssa, but to have some type of more communication one-on-one. So I think it's really important to put that part of your reunification plan. We were signing paperwork that night. We were driving ourselves home. That never, ever should have happened. And the next day, Alyssa was taken off of Pinnacle, the information that I got, and it was like she no longer existed. So I have a lot of trauma from obviously that day of finding out, but the lack of communication, the lack of help really just continued because there was no communication. So I just want to stress that's really important part of your reunification plan. And Lisa's been amazing and has really helped us and the families, through the trial and long-term to deal with our trauma.
It was something that we addressed today, Lori, because often as those that are helping support, we're learning from listening and watching both what's said and what's unsaid, because it's the people that we serve. The victims and the survivors know what, in their soul, what is needed. They might not always be able to voice it. So we're here to assess. And that's something that we talked about. And I even spoke to administrators or superintendents in the district. If you were in that room, really thinking about what is your pre-recovery or what is your response plan? How can it be really outlined? And there are all of those supportive pieces in place. It will always not be as efficient and as supportive. I think we've all talked about how difficult that reunification is, but it could be so much stronger if there is a plan before, because oftentimes districts are looking at how to respond versus how to plan. And it could be planning for not necessarily mass gun violence, but also any other tragedy that could take place in a system. And how do we help really collaborate with law enforcement, community providers, because there's always in a tragedy so many different components in different departments. We had that as one of our kind of points on how do we have those relationships ahead of time. That includes law enforcement. That includes responders. How are we going to, Todd talked about, they had it to even food service, like everyone. How do you help support in that moment is something he talked about in their 5-year plan.
Yeah, and Lori, thanks for just asking that question, because it is so important. That is something that we stressed in our presentation, is that recovery, the foundation of a recovery begins at reunification. And what you said, couldn't emphasize that anymore. And having that person who is your communications director, person who's just getting that information out in a timely fashion, and having mental health professionals on site and ready to not only support our students, but those parents that are there waiting to be reunified with their child. Every time we go through a critical incident that requires reunification, we learn something new. And so it doesn't matter if that's from a swatting incident where students evacuate themselves, they leave the building, and then we need to reunify them, or a threat of some sort. We learn something new every time. One thing that I will say that is an issue that I'm in the midst of working with right now with my district is 2 community partners, one of them being our resiliency center and then a mental health provider in our community, creating go kits, so wagons that are prepared to go any place when we have to reunify students. And And that way they can provide an opportunity to have families come together and unite. They can have community. They will get information firsthand from the district, and they can be prepared to go anywhere in our community where a school might need to evacuate and there might need to be reunification. That is something that we haven't seen replicated or created across the country, but it's something that we think is very valuable in our community specifically right now, just to speak to your point.
Yeah. And one of the things in the room, it was really cold, and I was just wearing a black tank top. So not only mentally I am going through this trauma, physically I was freezing and my body was going into shock.
Right. Yeah. And what we know is in that moment, right, you are building a sensory imprint, right? And so part of the reason I think you remember it so well is because your brain's in an alarm state. You're taking sensory input information more than you are, kind of that abstract, concrete thinking. And that's why it is important, right? There are really good models out there for reunification. And if your school district is not doing that, I would really recommend that you have that conversation and you include a mental health person, right? The Standard Reunification program is really good out of I Love You Guys Foundation. There's other models. We partner regularly with our law enforcement and we talk about there will be crisis counselors here and here's what their role is. And you actually have to physically kind of practice being together and who's going to do what, because all those things really do matter. And it always will be chaos. But the more that you can be planful, the more that you can care for people and have that in your mind that the mental health recovery starts now. It doesn't start in 2 weeks. And the last thing I'll say in that is sometimes when big incidents like this happen, the jurisdictional things come in really quickly. And when a big safety incident happens, usually everybody defaults to law enforcement. If they're in charge, we'll follow what they're doing. Well, they're securing safety, right? Their job is not thinking about the mental health aspect. A lot of them do have great victims advocates, but that's not their role. And so we need someone who is on scene, who knows what they're doing to say, hey, this is how we need to care for people immediately.
Wow. No, I think that's great. Some of the things that Lisa helped us with, and I don't think a lot of people understand everything that you are dealing with. In Parkland, you're trying to, after our shooting, you're trying to get the siblings back into school. You're helping them. You're helping the families. I know that we set up group therapy sessions. So you're helping the victims' families. You're helping the injured families. And then after a school shooting, there are the 1 month mark, the 1 year mark, these commemoration ceremonies that you're all helping with. And then Alex and Alyssa were 14, and so they were freshmen. And so when their graduating class graduated, it was how do we make sure that our kids and our loved ones are not left out of the graduation ceremonies. That was a huge endeavor and involved a lot of planning and making sure that everyone is involved. And if you have unilateral decisions that are not involving the victims' families, it does not go well at all. And so that's why it's so important to have this liaison be liaised and the coordinator to really coordinate all of this and make sure that the families are involved in that process. And then you've got the memorial, which is a whole nother, big project that, we want our loved ones' memories to always and never be forgotten. And so, you're doing so many different things, juggling so many different emotions, trying to help so many different people. That's why I just, in the last couple of minutes we have together, if you could just talk about this support group that you formed. That's the reason you're all here. This is the first time you've ever come together and presented as one unit. Can you talk about the importance of this support group and why you decided to form this?
Well, interestingly, Nate and I went to graduate school together, and he came to a presentation that I was a part of. We met in person last year for the first time. So while I feel incredibly connected, we've only known each other for a very short amount of time. And when I saw him and started speaking with him, minutes turned into hours, honestly. And it really was being in a space, because obviously my priority has always been confidentiality of your families, the families that I serve. And so it wasn't always something that I would share with other people. And so
we started meeting, he was connected, and
Kinda grew from
so
there.
it grew from there. Last year when we presented here, someone from Appalachia was here. Kelsey's role had not even been filled yet. And when that person shared my contact information, Kelsey reached out to me the first month of her job. And I said, listen, we meet, and it's kind of taken off from there. There's a principals network, so it's really easy to identify and locate on public media who the principal is. But the support system, it's really hard to identify and vet who really is doing the work and where is a safe space. And that's what our group really is a support from one another, and just how are you today? Lifting each other up and, really supporting, because part of, I think, watching your families, our communities go through such a tragedy, you want to be part of something that means something. And so like having that opportunity to, our recovery are in different places, but to help support some of the schools that are in recent moments. I met with a recent school, Nate helped that connection, actually drove with me to that meeting, and she sat in our presentation last year at this conference.
And so the support group is open, and you're hoping that other school shooting tragedies, the mental health people will join the support group, and then you can help others.
Yeah, and I think what this group has in common that I think is different than some other groups is people who are working long-term. We've worked long-term years and years on these recovery processes. There's a lot of people get involved in incidents that come in and out. Maybe they do a presentation or consultation. But this is long-term work. And so everybody sitting here is in it for the long haul, years and years of work. And it is organic. Like we don't have funding. We don't have, we're just helping each other out. But what we do know is that this work has really advanced, and all of the things that we've identified, these dynamics that you have to think about in the mental health recovery, and really applying it to how we know our brains work in recovery is so important and so different than it was, 25 years ago. That sharing this information, getting it out there is really important. So that's why we chose to present today, was we thought this is something other mental health leaders need to know, because they might be called to do this.
And I would just say that Nate and I came together, probably 3.5 or 4 years ago. And the value that brought to Oxford Community Schools to not only partner with other communities that experienced a tragedy similar to ours, but to have an individual, Nate, who has led through recovery prior to us, just allowed us to avoid missteps potentially, and to move our community forward in a fashion that was much more efficient and trauma-informed, because we didn't need to recreate the wheel, so to say. And even to bring Nate into our district at one point in order to meet with some of our highly impacted staff, in order to give them hope that here's a community that experienced something very similar to what we experienced, and this is where they're at now. And it really, to this day, I have staff members in our district that will come to me and just reference different points that Nate had made for them that just impacted them 2-3 years later. So it's powerful to be able to come along with a colleague that has a shared experience and be able to learn and grow and develop your leadership for your community.
And it's just wonderful, and I'm so glad Kelsey has you to lean on. And unfortunately, we know this is going to happen again. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing and helping the communities.
Well, and to feed a little bit off of, just to close out off of what Todd was saying, I think too, it's sometimes an afterthought when you're in a support role to find support for yourself. And I think the purpose of this group, and everybody finds support in different ways. So just because this is great for us, it doesn't mean it's going to be great for everyone, because maybe that's not what the right fit is for you. But I think one thing I've found, especially as the newbie to the group, is to just have somebody to bounce ideas off of, to have conversations. We've had lots of conversations about how our work isn't something we're just taking out into the public and talking to anybody about. Even our friends and family don't know a lot about the details of what we do. It's just not a conversation that we feel comfortable sharing information. It's a very confidential position to be in. And we all value and respect our relationships with our families, with the victims, with our staff, with our administrators, to the point where it's not something that you just go out and seek support for. And so to have a group that it's almost an unspoken. Sometimes you don't even have to say anything. Everyone just understands. Just does so much for you. And I think we've talked a lot about longevity and how important it is when you're in a recovery position to be in it for the long haul, because your foundation of your relationship started at a time where you are navigating through which direction do we even go in this trauma. We are lost and we don't know where to go. It develops a deeper relationship quicker. And the benefits of having the same person to do that job long term, to continue the same relationship and not have to bounce from one relationship to another, is so important to each of us. And so I think that's where having a support group who you then have kind of those same people to also have that relationship with in a supportive way makes all the difference, because sometimes it's very isolating. It can feel like you're drowning in a sea of emotions that are so heavy, you don't really know what to do with them. And so to just have guidance, and sometimes it is the littlest thing of, here, you're doing a great job. We know it's hard and we know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you're doing a great job. That goes a long way from someone who's had a shared experience and knows what it feels like. It's not just simply saying it, but understands in a different capacity. And I think that's one of the benefits of this group, is to be able to live those shared experiences, to learn from each other's wins and losses, to overcome barriers, to kind of share successes, are all so rewarding in the midst of such a challenging position that none of us would choose to be in. If it was up to us, we'd all reverse time and none of us would be in a recovery role. But because we are here to be the best version of ourselves for the position, this group is definitely a part of supporting that.
I think no family or helper should walk the path alone. And that's really, how do we come together? How do we bring people together to help support one another? Because families need it, and we want the people supporting you to stay in their roles long enough to do it for the long term.